Hey everybody, Dr. Shook here. I hope you're doing well. What I want to do in this video is I want to go over with you some really important information. This is a really important topic, and this has to do with the health of your brain. And the topic that I want to discuss with you is the real danger of brain fog and what it means. Because not many people realize that the issues that they're having with brain fog are actually warning signs of an unhealthy brain and some metabolic problems that need to be addressed. I want to put this in perspective for you, okay? First of all, 1 in 8 senior citizens, okay, 1 in 8 seniors will be diagnosed with dementia. Okay, they'll be diagnosed with some type of dementia. 1 in 8 seniors. This is a major problem. If you're not aware of this, this is dementia, neurodegenerative conditions, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and then other forms of dementia are projected to bankrupt the United States. We don't know globally how we're going to pay to take care of all of these neurodegenerative conditions that are predicted to occur. It is a massive amount of neurodegeneration. And the question you have to ask yourself is, why is this happening? Okay, why is this happening? I'm going to share with you what I've learned. I've had an opportunity to learn from some people that are very forward thinking and that have gone kind of against traditional thinking to look outside the box and discover some things that are, I think, extremely valuable to humanity and to our ability to take care of our own health, be empowered ourselves, and preserve our brain health. 1 in 8 children, okay, 1 in 8 children will be diagnosed with ADD and ADHD. Now, this is a huge issue. Why? Because people don't often think of this, but this is a brain-based problem. When kids have a problem with ADD and ADHD and they can't focus, they can't concentrate, that can be an issue with their frontal lobe function. This can be a neurotransmitter problem. This can be a blood sugar problem. This can be an inflammatory problem. Much as dementia has multiple factors that drive and promote it, which we'll talk about that in a second. The prevalence of dementia is 35 million people. It is projected to double in 20 years. Every 20 years, it's projected to double until 2050. That means right now we have 35 million, okay, 35 million. They said in 2010, there were 35 million people with dementia worldwide. In 2030, they're projecting that to go up to 65 million. In 2050, 115 million people, a massive number of people. How are we going to take care of them? How are we going to prevent this coming tide of these problems? More importantly, why is it happening? Why is it occurring? Okay? So some of the symptoms, so many people today, they think that the new normal, well, let me say this, the new normal for so many people is that they just don't feel well and that they think that's how it is. That's just normal part of everyday life. So many people go around and live day to day in such a state of poor health that they don't know any different. It is their normal, right? So many people have anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder like symptoms, brain fog, they have depression, they've got all of these issues, sleep disorders, moodiness. It's so common that they really have no idea that these are all brain-based symptoms. Learning disabilities. These are all brain-based symptoms that are screaming your brain is not functioning well. There is a problem here. These are the types of things that when you see this occurring, you have to ask yourself, what's happening to that person's brain? Why is this manifesting? Why are these signs of poor cognitive function showing up? What is driving that process? It's the question that you have to ask. If you're suffering with any of these problems, you have to ask yourself that same question. If your children, if your parents, if your friends, if your loved ones are dealing with these issues, this is not something to take lightly. There's something that you can do about it, and you just need to be aware that this is not normal. First of all, become aware of this problem, and then you have to start understanding what are the potential drivers here, which we're going to talk about in just a second. And you have to understand what the problem indicates, what it suggests that there's a brain-based issue, understand the potential drivers, and then from that you can determine a plan, right? That's what my goal is for you. So these are all warning signs, and they're significant drivers and of cognitive decline and dysfunction. These are all warning signs. So you can do a few things here. So first of all, I've studied under Dale Bredesen, so I'm a Bredesen qualified practitioner. I've done a tremendous amount of study in functional medicine for over 10 years. I've worked with thousands of people. I've taught thousands and thousands of people. I've taught millions of people. I have, the most viewed. So I work a lot with autoimmune conditions and thyroid dysfunction. So I have a tremendous amount of experience with brain fog, because one of the number one symptoms of thyroid dysfunction is low energy and lack of ability to concentrate and think, and brain fog. That's because the thyroid hormone is essential for normal neurological and brain function. So if you have a problem with your thyroid hormone physiology, you also will have a problem with the brain. You will have a problem with the brain. They are very intimately connected. I'm going to explain this in a second. So we know through Dale Bredesen's work, he's a research neurologist. He is at UCLA. He's the first person to publish and document the reversal of cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease, and not in just a few people. They currently have thousands of people that have gone through a process, Dr. Bredesen's protocol, and have followed the recommendations. And it's very interesting. Dr. Bredesen, they have identified 6 different drivers or subtypes of Alzheimer's disease. And so things like, you might say, well, I don't have Alzheimer's disease. Well, the things that precede or come before Alzheimer's are subjective cognitive impairment. So subjective cognitive impairment is where you don't, you're losing your memory. You're forgetting things. You're forgetting where your keys are. You walk out of the grocery store, you don't remember where you parked your car. You might, forget like directions somewhere, or you just don't remember names and faces and phone numbers. Those are all subjective cognitive impairment, meaning if we were to give you a test to assess cognitive function, you'd probably pass it. But you know that things are not the same way that they were. So it's normal to have a very, very moderate decline as we age of our cognitive abilities. That is normal. However, those things that I just mentioned are not normal. They are not, that is not normal. So that would be subjective cognitive impairment. It precedes or comes before Alzheimer's. Now, the next step closer to Alzheimer's is MCI, or mild cognitive impairment. Now, this is detectable on most assessment forms. Like, we will use the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Form. I actually recommend, if you're interested, if you have these issues, if you have Alzheimer's in your family, if you are having these problems I'm talking about here, that you complete the Montreal Cognitive Assessment Form. Now, what you can do is get your loved one or a friend. You can just download the form online. We can actually make it available to you if you need it. We use it in practice, and it has instructions. This needs to be administered by someone in person with you, and they can just read the instructions. It's not hard. It's a 1-page document. They will guide you, and you'll just fill it out, and then they'll score it after you're done. Okay, and so you can get a number score, and depending on where you fall within the range, it can tell you your degree of cognitive impairment. So it's really important that you understand this is a major problem, okay? And this is a spectrum. It is not you have Alzheimer's or you don't. Now, because the typical progression of Alzheimer's and cognitive decline is a slow process, okay? So we're going to talk about this. I don't want to belabor these points too much and talk too much about it, because there's a lot that I want to cover with you here. So we can look at these 6 drivers, and we want to consider some of the things that you can do, and there are really trial and error. So there are ways that, if you have cognitive impairment, you want to figure out what's going on, because once you lose brain cells, they are gone. Like, you can't make new brain cells. You can make new connections between neurons, which are the cells of the brain, but when you have lost so many neurons that they can no longer branch together because there's so much loss of brain mass, it's irreversible. Right? So it is irreversible loss. So there are trial and error. There are 3 things I want to talk to you that you can do trial and error, or that you can try to do on your own. 3 things. 6 drivers, 3 things. And what I recommend people do is don't play around with your brain. Don't play around with your cognitive function. If you're having these symptoms, you need to follow a science-based approach that is focused on detecting the problem using, I say DRR, detect, remove, repair. Okay, it's the strategy that I use in practice when I'm working with people. So we detect the problems. We do extensive testing to figure out what's driving the cognitive decline, which we'll talk about it in a second. I'm going to erase this and we're going to go through a second portion. Then once we've identified the problems, we implement a very specific strategy to remove those problems or address those problems. If it's something that needs to be eliminated, we want to eliminate it. If it's something that needs to be added to the body that it needs to function, we want to supplement. Once we've done that, then we want to repair and optimize your body. We want to get you as healthy as we can. So detect, remove, repair, a science-based approach with repeatable testing so that we can be specific, so that you're not guessing with trial and error. But if that's not an option for you for whatever reason, then there are some things I want to talk to you about. All right, so let's look now. Let me erase this and let's go into the second portion. Okay, this is where we're going to talk a little bit more specifically here. Let's see. Okay. A little bit more specifically here about some of these problems. I think this is something that you'll find very useful and interesting because I've done, like I said, I've done a lot of training. I'm a Bredesen qualified practitioner. There are only a few hundred people in the world that are Bredesen qualified practitioners that have actually trained, understand the training approach that Dr. Bredesen used, trained in and qualified to use his approach that he utilized to help people reverse cognitive decline and Alzheimer's. Now, we've been doing this. Dr. Bredesen's approach, actually the approach I use in practice, is almost identical. I mean, really, I've been doing it for 10 years, and we take a science-based approach. But let's talk about this. We want to understand why all these things are happening. That's really the goal that we need. The thing that we need to talk about right now is why is all this happening? So the first thing that we want to talk about is really these 5 different, the different causes and the different subtypes. Now, Dr. Bredesen actually had 6 different subtypes. So let's look at this, all right? So 6, and we're going to talk about Alzheimer's because it is the factors that promote Alzheimer's promote all of these problems. I mean, these are the drivers of the problems that we've discussed. All these issues, all these signs and symptoms, ADD, ADHD, dementia. These are, what I'm going to cover are the primary drivers here, okay? And these are the ones that are science-based, that are researched. So 6 drivers. Let's see if I can, drivers, okay? So number 1. Inflammation. I'm just going to write INF, okay? Inflammation. So inflammation promotes neuron or nerve cell degeneration. Okay, it's really important to understand this. Inflammation and anything that drives inflammation. So when you look at that, you've got to understand that there are a lot of things that can drive inflammation. You've got immune reactions. Let's see. Okay, so immune reactions, which can be food sensitivities. So you actually react to the food proteins that you consume. Pathogens. So these are, pathogens are viruses, bacteria, fungi, parasites. That's viruses, bacteria, fungi, parasites. These are all pathogens. Then we've got chemicals. So chemicals. Now chemicals are interesting because they can promote, what they can do is they bind to your tissues and they create this thing that the immune system does not recognize. So they can cause immune reactivity as well. So anything that drives inflammation, these are the general things that drive the inflammatory process. Okay. So if this is happening, if any of this is happening, it's going to promote inflammation. This is probably one of the major and the primary drivers of cognitive decline. Right here, inflammation. Number 2, second category, is going to be, so let me actually, I'm going to number these. I'm going to number these as Dr. Bredesen has numbered them. So he says number 1 is inflammation. And then, let's do it this way, okay? 1 is inflammation. 1.5 is, we're just going to say blood sugar. It's actually glycotoxic, but we're going to say blood sugar. Blood sugar fluctuations up and down create all kinds of hormonal changes. The blood sugar fluctuations disrupt your neurotransmitters, your brain chemicals. It spikes cortisol, your stress hormone cortisol. Cortisol is toxic to your neurons or your nerve cells. So blood sugar is absolutely critical. It is one of the subtypes. So these are 6 drivers. Dr. Bredesen calls these the 6 Alzheimer's subtypes. These are the things that cause Alzheimer's that he's identified. There are 6 drivers, and I'm going to go through this, but we're going to talk about the 6 drivers, but there are 36 factors that have been identified that these 6 drivers I'm going to discuss promote, which causes you to lose the neurons and nerve cells in the brain. Okay, so type 1.5 is blood sugar. Type 2 is atrophic. Atrophic means vitamin and mineral deficiency, primarily vitamin, mineral, and hormone deficiency. Basically, this is what it means. It means that you don't have something that you need for your brain to produce and encourage healthy nerve cell growth and new connections to be made between neurons. So you're missing something: vitamins, minerals, hormones. So when I talk about hormones, this is where thyroid hormone fits in. This is where testosterone deficiencies fit in. This is where estrogen fits in. This is where essential fatty acids. And I mean, you cannot have deficiencies, or you will not have what your body needs to produce new connections between nerve cells and to keep your neurons, which are your nerve cells, healthy. Type 2, Dr. Bredesen calls it atrophic, right? Okay, type 3. Toxic. Now, toxic is primarily what we're talking about when we talk about toxic is we're talking about biotoxins, okay? Biotoxins. So we're talking about mold exposure in the home, Lyme disease, chemicals, mercury. So definitely environmental, like chemical exposures. It's interesting that chemical exposures, they can work two different ways. One, they can work many different ways, but the primary ways, if you get high quantities of different chemicals, they can create some real significant problems for your endocrine system. But they can, on the other hand, they can activate, as we talked about here, the immune system. So they can disrupt normal hormonal physiology, normal nervous system physiology, and they can also disrupt the immune system. So this is a major problem. Chemicals are a major issue. So we've got type 1, 1.5, type 2, and type 3. So we've identified 1, 2, 3, 4 of our 6 types, right? Our 6 drivers. Okay, so the next one, which we're gonna call it 4, is CVD, cerebrovascular disease. So this is the case where, or we can even call this hypoxic. So like low oxygenation or poor oxygen delivery to the brain. So when you have all of these blood vessels that supply the brain with blood, if they are atherosclerotic, if they have plaquing that's disrupting and decreasing and diminishing blood supply to the brain, you're going to have a problem with nutrient delivery. You're going to have a problem with oxygen delivery. This can contribute to strokes, right? This is a major issue. So this cerebrovascular, when you see this, you say, well, this can promote dementia, but why do we have cerebrovascular disease? And this kind of comes back to a lot of these things. You'll primarily see cerebrovascular is inflammatory in nature. It's also genetic. The greatest risk factor. Well, let's talk about that at the end, okay? Cerebrovascular. Now, and then the last type, which is our 6th one, but it's type 5, because remember we had a 1.5. Our sixth one is traumatic. Trauma. So traumatic. So if you have repeated and head injuries, just imagine football players or boxers or anyone that participates in sport, even soccer. We don't often think about that, but soccer players head the ball. You can have some major issues. But trauma to the brain predisposes you to, it activates, concussions bruise the brain. It damages the neurons. It contributes to an inflammatory process. It promotes loss of nerve cells. It is not a good thing at all. It is a serious, serious problem. So trauma also contributes to this. Now, what you'll find is that no one's one pure type. So you have to cast a wide net. We do, when we work this up and we use Dr. Bredesen's recommendations, we do very extensive testing. This is very extensive. Now, if you can't do that, then you can do some trial and error things that I want to talk about too. Before we get into the trial and error and talk a little bit more about the approach, I wanted to mention to you the greatest risk factor, our currently known greatest risk factor for Alzheimer's. APOE4. APOE4 is a genetic variant. It's a genetic variation. It's a unique, we call it a single nucleotide polymorphism. It's a big mouthful, I know, but it's just SNP for SNP, single nucleotide polymorphism. APOE4, it is a gene that affects your droplet size of your cholesterol droplets. Okay, so it encodes for some of these transport chylomicrons. It's the small droplets of cholesterol. Okay, so it encodes for it. When you're APOE4 positive, if you have no copies, so you don't have it, right? You have a 9% risk. Okay. If you have one copy, so you can have either one or two. So if you have one copy, it would be like plus minus. So you've got one copy, right? That's a 30%. If you have this would